You don't understand.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Ghost Chronicles. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We journey into most unsettling, bone-chilling, real-life horror stories that the shadows have to offer. If you're a returning viewer, glad to have you back. Friend, your support is the lifeblood of this channel and truly means the world to me. This video is one that has been blowing up my comments section with requests. A full hour of terrifying stories, all set deep within the folklore-steeped heart of the Appalachian Mountains. I know these are some of your absolute favorites, so I've curated 8 of the most disturbing encounters I've ever come across. Now, these are classic tales from the archive, but they're classics for a reason. They're some of the best and most terrifying. And don't you worry, a full hour of brand new horror is already in the works. But for now, I want you to sit back, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself for a journey into the dark, whispering heart of the Appalachians. A massive thank you to everyone who's shown so much love and support for the channel. It honestly means everything. Now let's get into it. Remember, viewer discretion is advised. The story I'm about to tell you happened over 25 years ago, back in the late 90s. The reason I'm finally sharing it is twofold. First, the case has gone completely cold, totally forgotten by the media, and that just doesn't sit right with me. Second, and more importantly, I need to warn people. You have to pay attention to your gut. Pay attention to the people you let into your life, the ones you call friends. Because if your instincts are screaming at you that something is dead wrong, you damn well better listen. At the time, this whole nightmare was all over the local news, and I have absolutely no desire to go through that media circus again. For the sake of everyone's privacy and my own sanity, I won't be using any real names or mentioning the exact location in the Great Smoky Mountains. But I need you to understand every other detail of the plastic, the knocking, the smile, all of it happened exactly as I'm about to describe. This isn't some campfire story. This is the reason I'm still alive. I've always been the quiet type, the wallflower at the party. Making friends has never been my strong suit. I was a painfully shy girl, and most people just figured I was rude or stuck up. It was a lonely way to go through my teen years, for real. So, when I started college, it was like a chance to hit the reset button. That's when I met Leah. She was the polar opposite of me. Hilarious, loud, outgoing, the kind of person who could make friends with a brick wall. We clicked instantly, and little by little, she pulled me into her orbit, into her friend group she'd had since freshman year. For someone like me, the idea of belonging to a tight-knit crew like that was a jackpot. It was something I'd only ever seen in movies. So when opportunity came, I grabbed onto it with both hands and didn't let go. The group was awesome, a bunch of good-hearted, fun-loving people. I genuinely loved every single one of them. Well, almost all of them. There was one guy, let's call him Robert, who always set my teeth on edge. It was nothing I could put my finger on. He'd never been anything but polite to me, but there was this vibe. Something about him just gave me the creeps, and not in a fun, ghost story kind of way. He had this way of looking at you, a little too long, a little too intensely, like he was trying to figure out how you were put together. It was just sketchy. The summer after our sophomore year, the group decided to go all out. The plan was to spend a week at a huge, rustic cabin deep in the Great Smoky Mountains and hike a section of the Appalachian Trail in that area. I'd never been what you'd call adventurous. I don't think I'd ever been camping in my life, and the closest I'd come to a hike was walking to class. But the idea of a week away with my new friends, it was a no-brainer. I said yes without a second thought. The drive up to the mountains is one of my fondest memories. We were all crammed into a beat-up van, singing along to the radio, totally psyched for the week ahead. The hike to the cabin itself was exhausting, but the views were insane and the feeling of accomplishment was a whole nother level. I remember watching Robert during the hike. He seemed particularly amped, more animated and excited than I had ever seen him. He was practically bouncing off the trees, talking a mile a minute about the wilderness and the feeling of being truly free. For a fleeting moment, I started to wonder if I'd just been a jerk, if I had misjudged him this whole time. Maybe this was just his element. Michael, the designated plan of the group, had the entire week scheduled down to the minute. He was that guy, loved his lists and itineraries. The big event was a 2-day hike planned for the third day. We were going to tackle one of the most famous and difficult trails in that part of the Smokies, which meant we'd have to spend one night camping out in tents to reach a specific scenic overlooked by sunrise. I had never camped before, and despite my inexperience, the idea sounded like an adventure, but my body had other plans. By the second day at the cabin, I started feeling off. It began with a dull headache and a scratchy throat, and by evening, I was pretty sure I was running a fever. I felt hot and shivery, totally wiped out. Of course, in a cabin full of college kids, no one thought to pack a thermometer. We all just kind of guessed. After a bit of back and forth, we decided it was best for me to stay at the cabin while the others went on the big overnight hike. Leah put up a fight, bless her heart. She said it was a load of crap for me to stay there all by myself. But I was adamant. I didn't want to be the buzzkill who ruined the main event of the trip. Besides, if I was legit sick, it was better they didn't hang around and catch whatever I had. That's when Robert spoke up. "Don't worry about it," he said, his voice smooth and reassuring. "I'll stay behind with her." He quickly added that he'd been feeling a bit under the weather himself and didn't want to slow the group down on a tough hike. The way he said it, and the small, tight smile he gave me right after, made my stomach do a backflip. There was again that bad vibe, 1,000 times stronger this time. It was something in his eyes. They were flat, emotionless, even as his mouth was smiling. It was a primal, gut-level instinct screaming danger. But I was a shy, 20-year-old girl who was terrified of making waves. I had no proof, no concrete reason to accuse him of anything. So I pushed the feeling down, smiled back weakly, and let it go. Being safe is one thing. Being a paranoid weirdo is another, right? I just didn't want to ruin the mood. The next morning, the group packed up and left. Leah came into my room and gave me a bear hug, asking me for the 10th time if I was sure I'd be okay. She whispered that Robert gave her the heebie-jeebies, too. I wish to God I had listened to her, or to myself. But I just forced my best smile and told her not to worry. The day passed in a haze of awkward silence and mounting dread. Robert would try to make small talk, and I'd give one-word answers. He'd be there just lingering. If I was in the kitchen, he'd suddenly be there too, getting a glass of water. If I was reading in the living room, I'd look up and he'd be standing in the doorway, just watching me. Nothing overtly threatening, but it was a constant, unnerving presence. When night fell, my fever spiked. I felt awful and decided to turn in early. He smiled at me from his armchair across the living room. That same eerie reptilian smile. "Good night," he said. "Sleep well." I went to my bedroom. For the 2 nights we'd been there, none of us had ever locked our doors. We were a group of friends in the middle of nowhere. But that night, instinct took over completely. I didn't even think about it. My hand just reached out, shut the heavy wooden door, and turned the old brass lock. The click of the bolt sliding into place was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I woke up around 2:30 a.m. to a soft, hesitant knock on my door. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Yeah," I called out, my voice raspy. It was Robert. His voice was casual, almost gentle. "Hey, sorry to wake you, but my head is killing me. Do you have any painkillers I could grab?" My mind raced. This felt like a test. Leah left the first aid kit in the kitchen. I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Should be on the counter." There was a pause on the other side of the door. A brief, almost imperceptible silence, but it was charged with something heavy. It sent a fresh shiver of ice down my spine. "Oh, right. Thanks," he finally said, and I heard his footsteps retreat down the hall. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe he really did just have a headache. But not even 30 minutes later, he knocked again. This time, it was harder, more insistent. "Knock, knock, knock. What is it?" I asked, sitting bolt upright. "Hey, that stuff didn't work," he said, his voice a little strained. "Can I get a different pill? Maybe you have something stronger." That made zero sense. He knew you couldn't mix medications like that in such a short time. We'd literally had that conversation in a health class we shared. He wasn't asking for a pill. He was trying to find an excuse, any excuse, to get me to open that door. I explained to him, as calmly as I could, that it was a bad idea. Another silence. This one was longer, more menacing. He was hell-bent on getting in. Then, the niceties evaporated. His voice dropped, turning into an aggressive, guttural snarl. Open the goddamn door and give me the pill. My blood ran cold. This was it. He was desperate, and I knew that old wooden door wouldn't stand a chance if he really wanted to break it down. I was a sitting duck. That's when I made the split-second decision that, without a doubt, saved my life. Calling 911 was a no-go. We were in the middle of nowhere with no cell service. And what would I even say? My friend is acting creepy. I had to get the hell out of Dodge. I grabbed my jacket, stuffed my wallet and keys into a small backpack, and slid the bedroom window open as silently as I could. The drop was about 10 feet onto soft, damp earth. I landed with a muffled thud, scrambled to my feet, and just ran. I ran blindly into the pitch-black forest, branches whipping at my face, my lungs on fire. I didn't look back. I just ran until my legs gave out, and I collapsed, gasping for air. Luckily, I tumbled into a small, rocky depression, a little hollow between some moss-covered boulders. I crammed myself into the tight space and spent the rest of the night there, shaking uncontrollably. It was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, I was sure it was him. I didn't know if he'd followed me, or some wild animal was about to stumble upon my hiding spot. I was completely and utterly spooked. When daylight finally broke, I started walking, trying to head in what I hoped was the opposite direction of the cabin. I knew my friends were due back that day, and I prayed that when Leah realized I was gone, she'd call for help. I spent 2 miserable days lost in the Smoky Mountains, terrified, sick, and with almost no food. At the end of the second day, a search and rescue team found me. After 2 days in the hospital getting rehydrated and treated for what they discovered was a nasty case of food poisoning. The police came to talk to me. What they told me made every hair on my body stand on end. Robert had disappeared. He was gone without a trace. But that wasn't the punchline. The real horror was what my friends found when they got back to the cabin. The entire main living room area, the one with the sofas, the TV, and the big stone fireplace, was covered wall to wall, floor to ceiling, in thick industrial plastic sheeting. It was meticulously taped down at the seams. It wasn't a prank. It was a kill room. For 22 days, the authorities conducted one of the most extensive searches in that park's history. They used dogs, helicopters, everything. But they never found a single trace of Robert. He probably had an escape route planned and managed to bail, maybe even left the country. It was clear he was no amateur. I eventually moved to another state to try and start over. Over the years, I lost touch with everyone from that friend group. Even Leah. The shared trauma was too much. I think it was a constant reminder. And while I'm okay, physically, I was never able to go hiking or camping again. The thought of being in the woods, especially at night, sends me into a full-blown panic attack. I'm wary of almost everyone who comes into my life now. My goal in telling this story, my reason for digging all this up, is to hammer this point home. That gut instinct exists for a reason. It's a primal alarm system. We spend so much of our lives being told to be polite, to not make a scene, to not upset others. But I'm living proof that it's always better to be the paranoid jerk and be safe than to be the polite victim and be sorry. Or worse, to not be anything at all. This is a hard story to tell. Not because I'm afraid of being disbelieved, but because it took something I loved, something pure, and stained it with a darkness I can never wash away. This happened to me in the autumn of 2011, and for the sake of the families of the people I'll mention later, I've been asked to keep the exact location within the Pisgah National Forest vague. I was a landscape photographer back then, or at least trying to be. My passion was capturing the raw, untouched soul of the wilderness, and there's no place more soulful than the Appalachians in the fall. I'd planned a 3-day solo trek. My goal was to get deep off the beaten path, far from the weekend hikers and scenic overlooks, to a specific ridgeline that was rumored to have unparalleled views of the rolling, multicolored canopy. I was experienced, and my pack was loaded with everything I needed, a one-man tent, dehydrated meals, water purification tablets, and my precious camera gear, all sealed in weatherproof bags. I wasn't looking for danger. I was looking for beauty. I told my wife I'd be back by Sunday evening, kissed her goodbye, and drove toward the mountains, feeling that familiar thrill of anticipation. The first day was magnificent. The air was crisp, the sky was a piercing blue, and the forest floor was a carpet of crimson and gold. I made great time, the rhythm of my boots on the trail, a steady, meditative beat. I felt utterly at peace, just me and the ancient mountains. That evening, I made camp near a gurgling stream and felt like the luckiest man on earth. The second day, the atmosphere began to change. The trail grew fainter, more of suggestion than a path, and the woods became denser, quieter. The cheerful chatter of birds faded, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to soak up sound. It was around midday when I stumbled upon the first thing that felt wrong. Tucked away in a small clearing was a campsite. It wasn't old. The ashes in the fire pit were still dark and flaky, but it was abandoned, and not just packed up, it looked like it had been fled. A half-eaten can of beans sat on a log, attracting flies. A sleeping bag was unrolled but lay askew, as if its occupant had scrambled out of it in a blind panic. I saw scuff marks in the dirt, heading away from the camp and into the thick brush, not back toward the trail. My gut clenched. Hikers don't just leave gear like that. I called out a tentative. Hello? Anyone here? Only the wind rustling the leaves answered. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I told myself there had to be a rational explanation, maybe a medical emergency, a sudden evacuation, but it felt hasty, fearful. I took a quick photo of the scene out of habit, a photographer documenting the strange, then packed at my own unease and pushed onward, eager to put distance between myself and that strange, silent clearing. About an hour later, I saw the symbol. I was taking a break, leaning against a massive oak tree to drink some water, when my eyes traced the patterns in the bark. There, just above eye level, was a carving. It was fresh, the wood inside the cut still pale. It was a perfect triangle, and running from its top point down to the middle of its base was a single, straight vertical line. It was deliberate, geometric, and utterly out of place in the organic chaos of the forest. I'd never seen a trail marker like it. It wasn't official Park Service signage. I ran my fingers over it. It felt strange, like a secret language. For a moment, I wondered if it was connected to the abandoned campsite, some kind of hobo sign, or a marker for a local group. But again, I rationalized away. Probably just some kids messing around, I thought, dismissing it. But I couldn't shake the image. The symbol was simple, but it felt ancient, weighted with a meaning I couldn't grasp. I took another photo, more out of curiosity this time, and kept moving. That's when the sky turned on me. The blue vanished, replaced by a bruised, purple-gray ceiling of clouds that rolled in with alarming speed. The temperature plummeted. Before I could even think to pull out my rain gear, the heavens opened. This wasn't a drizzle. It was a torrential Appalachian downpour. Rain came down in blinding sheets, and the wind howled, whipping branches into a frenzy. The faint trail I was following dissolved into a muddy stream in minutes. I was soaked, disoriented, and getting dangerously cold. The ridgeline was out of the question. Survival was now the priority. I abandoned the trail and plunged downhill, hoping to find lower ground and some natural cover. Through the sheets of rain, I saw a dark shape looming in the trees, a small, dilapidated cabin. It looked ancient, the wood warped and gray, but it had 4 walls and a roof. It was salvation. I slogged through the mud and practically fell against the door, shoving it open. The inside was dark and smelled of damp earth and rot. A single room, a dirt floor, a crude wooden table, and a small cot in the corner. It was abandoned, I thought, a forgotten hunter's shack. I dropped my heavy pack with a sigh of relief, shivering, my teeth chattering. As my eyes adjusted, I started to notice details. The place wasn't just old, it was occupied. On the table, there was a rusty knife and a half-peeled potato. A pile of greasy-looking blankets was heaped on the cot. This wasn't a historical relic. This was someone's home. A squatter, maybe? My relief curdled back into anxiety. I was trespassing. I was about to grab my pack and brave the storm again when I heard a sound over the drumming rain. A heavy, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. It was a sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching the cabin. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. It had to be the owner. I held my breath, planning to apologize profusely for intruding. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. Silence. I waited for a knock, for a voice. Nothing, just the roar of the storm. Then I saw the doorknob, a simple brass fixture, begin to turn. Slowly, excruciatingly slowly. Instinct took over. I lunged forward and slammed my hand down on the knob, holding it in place. I could feel the pressure from the other side, a steady, insistent force trying to turn it. We were locked in a silent tug-of-war. My mind was screaming. Who tries to enter a place like this without knocking? Who moves with such quiet, predatory patience? After what felt like an eternity, the pressure vanished. I heard the footsteps again, but this time they weren't retreating. They were circling the cabin. I crept to the nearest window, its glass grimy and cracked, and peered through a small clear patch. Through the deluge, I saw a figure, a tall, gaunt man in a drenched flannel shirt. His face was a massive shadow, but I could see a thick, unkempt beard and long, stringy hair plastered to his skull. He wasn't looking for shelter from the storm. He was looking at the cabin. He was hunting. He stopped at each window, cupping his hands to the glass, trying to peer inside. I ducked below the sill, my body trembling uncontrollably. This was no squatter. This was the man from the abandoned campsite. I was sure of it. He had been tracking me. Suddenly, there was a sharp crack. From the other side of the cabin, glass shattered. He had broken a window. I knew in that instant I couldn't stay. He was coming in. There was no barricade, no weapon, no hope of fighting. My only chance was the one thing he wouldn't expect: to run out into the very storm he thought had me trapped. I took a deep breath, wrenched the door open, and sprinted out into the blinding rain. I didn't look back. I just ran, fueled by pure terror. I ran blindly through the woods, branches whipping at my face, mud sucking at my boots. I slipped and fell, scrambling back to my feet, my lungs on fire. I didn't know if he was behind me. The storm was too loud, my own panic too deafening. All I could see was the symbol in my mind's eye, the triangle and the line, a brand seared into my memory. I have no idea how long I ran. An hour, maybe two. My body was giving out. Then, through the trees, I saw it, the glint of wet pavement, a road. I practically fell onto the asphalt, waving my arms frantically at a pair of approaching headlights. A beat-up pickup truck screeched to a halt, and an old man with a kind, worried face helped me into the passenger seat, wrapping a blanket around my shaking shoulders. The next day, after I'd been treated for hypothermia, I led the sheriff's deputies back to the area. They found the cabin right where I said it would be. They also found my pack, its contents rifled through but my camera gear untouched. The man was gone. But the true horror, the unsettling reveal that haunts me to this day, was what they found inside. Tucked into the cot, shoved into old potato sacks, was a collection. It was a collection of backpacks, hiking boots, and worn wallets. Inside the wallets were the IDs of 4 different people. The deputies recognized the names immediately. They were all hikers who had been reported missing in that same national forest over the last 5 years. People the authorities had assumed had simply gotten lost, fallen, or been taken by the elements. They weren't lost. They were hunted. I was meant to be the 5th. I never went back to landscape photography. I sold all my gear. Every time I looked at one of my beautiful pictures of the mountains, all I could see was a grimy window of that cabin, the vacant eyes of the man in the rain, and the cold, hard geometry of the symbol he used to mark his territory. The beauty of the wild is real, but I learned that day that so is its darkness, and sometimes it has a human face. My uncle was what you call a mountain man, born and raised in a small, unincorporated community deep in the heart of the Daniel Boone National Forest in Kentucky. He lived in a house his own father had built, a place without reliable cell service, where the nearest neighbor was a 2-mile hike away. I grew up in the city, so visiting him was like stepping into another century. He taught me how to track, how to fish, and most importantly, how to respect the woods. He had one cardinal rule: never wander off the known paths after dusk. The night, he'd say in his low drawl, reclaims things. This story happened about 8 years ago, during my sophomore year of college. My girlfriend Clara and I were on a tight budget, but desperate for a break. My uncle offered us his cabin for a long weekend. He'd be away visiting family, but he left the key under a loose stone by the porch. It was perfect, a free, secluded getaway. We arrived on a Friday afternoon. The cabin was exactly as I remembered it: rustic, smelling of pine and wood smoke, with a big stone fireplace that dominated the main room. We spent the day hiking a familiar loop trail my uncle had shown me countless times, enjoying the feeling of being the only two people in the world. As evening approached, we headed back, planning to start a fire and cook dinner. That's when I first felt it. The unmistakable, prickling sensation of being watched. It's a primal feeling, one that bypasses logic and hits you straight in the brainstem. I stopped and scanned the dense wall of trees lining the trail. Nothing, just deepening shadows and the slow creep of twilight. Clara asked what was wrong. I shook my head, blaming it on an overactive imagination fueled by my uncle's old ghost stories. Just thought I saw a deer. I lied, not wanting to spook her, but the feeling didn't go away. It clung to us, a silent passenger on our walk back to the cabin. We made it back, locked the door behind us, and I immediately felt a sense of relief. Inside felt safe. We got a roaring fire going in the fireplace, the cheerful crackling pushing back the encroaching darkness. As I was chopping vegetables for dinner, Clara, who was sitting on the couch by the window, suddenly went rigid. "Mark," she whispered, her voice tight, "there's someone outside." I put the knife down, my blood running cold. I moved slowly to the window and peered out from behind the curtain. In the faint twilight, I could see a figure standing at the edge of the woods, right where the manicured yard met the untamed forest. It was unervingly still, little more than a silhouette against the dark trees. It was too far to make out any details, but it was tall and unnaturally thin. "Maybe they're lost," Clara suggested, though her voice trembled. "Maybe," I said, but my uncle's words echoed in my head. The night reclaims things. People didn't just get lost and stand silently at the edge of someone's property like a statue. I'm going to turn on the porch light. I flipped the switch, and a single yellow bulb flooded the front porch and the yard with a sickly light. The figure was gone, vanished. I scanned the entire tree line, my heart pounding. There was no sign of movement. It was as if it had simply dissolved back into the shadows. We told ourselves it must have been a trick of the light, a strangely shaped tree stump, anything but what we both feared it was. But neither of us truly believed it. We ate our dinner in a tense silence, every creak of the old cabin making us jump. Later that night, we were trying to watch a movie on my laptop. The volume turned low. That's when we heard the sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping. It wasn't at the door or a window. It sounded like it was coming from above, from the roof. Tap, tap, tap. It was slow, deliberate. My first thought was a branch, but there was no wind. The night was deathly still. "It's a raccoon," Clara whispered, trying to convince herself as much as me. But the tapping stopped and a new sound began, a low, guttural noise. It wasn't an animal growl. It was a wet, clicking sound from deep within a throat, like a broken clock trying to tick. It was a sound that had no place in nature. My uncle had taught me the calls of every animal in these woods, and this was not one of them. The sound moved across the roof, the quiet scrape of something dragging itself along the shingles. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. This wasn't a person. A person couldn't move on a pitched roof silently, that easily. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a cast iron fire poker, and stood in the middle of the room, staring at the ceiling, my arm protectively in front of Clara. We were trapped. The only way out was through the doors, and the thing on our roof was blocking our escape. The scraping stopped directly over the living room. Then we heard a new sound, the horrifying splinter of wood. It was coming from the stone chimney. It was trying to get in through the flue. I stared at the fireplace, my knuckles white on the poker. The flue was closed, but it was old, if whatever was out there was strong enough. Suddenly, a small shower of soot and debris puffed out of the fireplace, dusting the hearth. Clara let out a muffled scream. It was in the chimney. We could hear it shifting, a scraping, scrabbling sound accompanied by that awful wet clicking. It was too big to fit, but it was trying, wriggling and forcing its way down. That's when I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait for it to break through. I whispered to Clara, "When I say run, we run. Out the back door, to the car. Don't look back." She nodded, her eyes wide with terror. I took a deep breath. "Now!" We bolted. We flew to the back door. I fumbled with the deadbolt, wrenched it open, and we burst out into the cold night. The car was parked about 50 feet away. It felt like a mile. As we ran, I risked a glance back at the cabin. That's when I saw it. It was unfolding itself from the top of the chimney, pulling itself out with an unnatural flexibility. In the faint moonlight, its form was a nightmarish contradiction. It had the long limbs and basic shape of a human, but it moved all wrong. Its joints seemed to bend at odd, impossible angles as it straightened up, its movements jerky and insect-like. It wasn't climbing down, it was unfurling. It turned its head toward us, and though I couldn't see a face, I saw 2 points of light reflect the moon far too brightly, like a predator's eyes. That image burned itself into my brain as we scrambled into the car. I jammed the key into the ignition, my hand shaking so badly it took 3 tries. The engine roared to life. I slammed the car into reverse, not caring what was behind me, and sped backward down the long gravel driveway. As the headlights swung around, they swept across the cabin, and it was there, standing in the yard, right where we had seen the silhouette earlier. It wasn't running. It was just standing there, watching us leave, its head tilted at a curious, unnatural angle. It had moved from the roof to the front yard in seconds without making a sound. We didn't stop driving until we hit the first well-lit gas station an hour down the mountain, the fluorescent lights feeling like a holy sanctuary. We called the state police from there. When I told the dispatcher what happened, I left out the part about how it moved. I just said a man tried to break into our cabin through the chimney. I knew they'd think I was crazy otherwise. The next morning, 2 deputies escorted me back to the cabin. The scene was what confirmed the true horror. The back door was still wide open just as we left it, but inside the room was a wreck. The heavy wooden table was overturned. The couch cushions were shredded, their stuffing pulled out, and the fireplace, the heavy iron grate that had been bolted in front of it, was bent outwards, twisted as if by immense force. But the worst part was the chimney. A forensic specialist the deputies had brought along examined it. He found deep, gouged-like scratch marks all the way down the inside of the stone flue. At the bottom, he found something that made him go pale. It was a single dirty fingernail, but was nearly 2 inches long, curved and yellowed like an animal's claw. The specialist report, which I saw later, concluded that the damage and the claw-like nail were inconsistent with any known local fauna. They never found a suspect. They classified it as an attempted burglary by a person or persons unknown. But I know what I saw. It wasn't just a man. It was something else. Something that pretended to be a man. It wears a human shape, but it moves like a spider, sounds like a machine breaking down, and it hunts in the dark from above. My uncle was right. The night reclaims things, and that night, it almost reclaimed us. I've been a park ranger for nearly 15 years now. Most of that time spent in the sprawling wilderness of the George Washington and Jefferson National Forests in Virginia. I've seen it all, or so I thought. I've dealt with bears, rescued lost hikers, put out fires, and chased off poachers. You develop a sixth sense out here, an intuition that tells you when something is out of place. Usually, it's a non-native plant or a shift in animal behavior. But one day, that intuition screamed at me about a different kind of predator. It's a day I'll never be able to forget. The story I'm about to tell is from an official incident report I filed back in 2016, though I'm leaving out badge numbers and specific trail names. It was a crisp Tuesday in late spring, the kind of quiet weekday when the trails are mostly empty. I was doing a routine patrol in my truck, checking on some of the more remote access points along a winding fire road. These are areas where people legally dump trash or set up unauthorized campsites. So to part of the job, albeit a boring one. I pulled up to a small gravel lot at the head of a trail called Laurel Creek. It's not a popular hike, a bit rugged and doesn't lead to a big scenic overlook, so it mostly attracts hardcore fishermen heading to the creek. There was only one other vehicle there, an old, beat-to-hell sedan, rust-colored and sitting low on its tires. It had out-of-state plates, caked with mud. I didn't think much of it at first. I got out, stretched my legs, and started walking the first 100 yards of the trail, just checking for fallen trees or washouts from the recent rains. Everything seemed normal. The forest was alive with the sounds of spring. I was about to turn back to my truck when I saw something on the ground. It was a woman's earring, a small, silver hoop, lying in the mud right next to a prominent boot print. The print was deep, from a heavy work boot, much larger than what you'd expect from the kind of lightweight hiking boots most people wear. And the earring, it just felt wrong. People lose things on trails all the time, but this, combined with a shabby car and the oversized boot print, tripped a wire in my head. I radioed it in standard procedure. Dispatch! This is Ranger Fort David, at the Laurel Creek trailhead. Got a suspicious vehicle, possibly abandoned. Seeing some odd sign on the trail. Could do a quick sweep. Over. Dispatch acknowledged, and I continued down the path, my hand resting on the grip of my service pistol out of habit. The feeling of being watched started almost immediately. It's different from when an animal is watching you. An animal is curious or wary. This felt cold, calculating. I kept stopping, listening, scanning the dense rhododendron thickets that lined the trail. The woods were too quiet. The normal chatter of squirrels and birds had ceased. That's a universal sign in the wild that a predator is near. I just assumed it was a bear or a coyote. I walked for another quarter mile, the eerie silence pressing in on me. Then I heard it, a single, sharp snap of a twig, somewhere off my left, deep in the woods. I froze. Park ranger. Is someone there? I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud. No response. I waited a full minute. Nothing. I told myself it was my nerves getting the better of me. I continued on, but my pace was slower now, more deliberate. Every shadow seemed to hold a shape. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being paralleled, stalked from within the cover of the trees. A few minutes later, I found the second piece of the puzzle. It was a small backpack, the kind a woman might carry, tossed haphazardly into a bush. Its contents, a water bottle, a wallet, a paperback novel, were spilled onto the ground. Now my blood was ice. This was no longer a hunch. This was a scene. I drew my weapon. Dispatch! This is Fort David. I said into my radio, my voice low and urgent. I have a confirmed situation. Found a discarded pack. Looks like a possible abduction or assault. I'm at approximately mile marker 0.5 on the Laurel Creek Trail. I need backup. Now! As I was speaking, I heard another sound. This time it was closer. It was the unmistakable sound of someone trying to move quietly, but failing, a soft crunch of leaves, a muffled scrape of fabric against bark. They were shadowing me, and they were getting bolder. They knew I had found the pack. My training kicked in. I couldn't stay on the trail. It was a kill zone. I needed to get to a position of advantage. I veered off the path, moving up the steep hillside, putting my back to a thick rock outcropping that gave me a clear view of the trail below. I knelt, my pistol held in a two-handed grip, and I waited. The silence returned, thick and absolute. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. My eyes scanned the dense woods below. Nothing. Was I wrong? Had they fled? And then I saw him. He stepped out from behind a massive poplar tree, right onto the trail where I had just been standing. He wasn't a hiker. He was a big man, burly, wearing dirty jeans and the same heavy work boots that had made the print I'd seen earlier. His face was grizzled with a week's worth of stubble, and his eyes, even from 50 yards away, his eyes looked flat and dead. He held a long, rusty machete in his hand, holding it casually, like it was an extension of his own arm. He stood there, looking at the spot where I had left the trail. He tilted his head, like a dog trying to solve a puzzle. Then he looked down at the ground, studying my tracks. A slow, ugly smile spread across his face. He knew I was close. He lifted his head and looked directly up the hillside, his dead eyes sweeping the area. I held my breath, motionless, praying the foliage was thick enough to hide me. For a terrifying second, his gaze seemed to lock right onto my position, and my finger tightened on the trigger. But then, his head snapped to the sound of my radio crackling to life. For David, be advised, backup is en route. ETA 6 minutes. Acknowledge. Over. The man's smile vanished. He looked down the trail, back toward the parking lot, then back up at the hillside where I was hidden. He knew his time was up, but he wasn't panicked. He simply gave a short, contemptuous nod, as if acknowledging my small victory, then turned and melted back into the trees, moving with a speed and silence that was shocking for a man his size. I didn't move until I heard the sirens. When the deputies arrived, we conducted a full sweep of the area. We never found the man, but about 100 yards from where he'd disappeared, we found her. She was alive. Thank God. She'd been bound and gagged, hidden in a dense thicket. She was terrified and bruised, but otherwise unharmed. Her story was chilling. The man's car had been broken down at the trailhead. When she'd arrived, he had asked for help. The moment she got out of her car, he pulled a knife. He forced her down the trail, telling her he was just going to rob her. But the further they got from the road, the more his intentions became terrifyingly clear. He had dragged her off the trail to the spot where we found her. He was about to assault her when my arrival had interrupted him. He had left her there, gagged, to go and deal with the ranger. He had been actively hunting me. The unsettling reveal, the part that stays with me, came later. When they ran the plates on his junker car, it came back registered to a man who had died 3 years prior. The car was a ghost, and when they searched it under a pile of filthy blankets in the trunk, they found a collection of driver's licenses. All women, 6 of them. 2 belonged to local women who had been reported missing over the last 5 years. Their cases long gone cold. The other 4 were from out of state. We were standing in the hunting ground of the ghost who collected trophies. My intuition hadn't just been about a dumped backpack. It had led me straight into the lair of a serial predator. I saved a life that day, but I also learned that some monsters don't live in folklore. They drive rusted-out sedans and wait for you at lonely trailheads. This is one of those stories you replay in your head 1,000 times, picking apart every decision, wondering what you could have done differently. It happened in the fall of 2018, deep in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. There were 4 of us, me, my older brother, Tom, his girlfriend, Sarah, and our childhood friend, Liam. We were all experienced hikers, and we'd planned this trip for months, a challenging 3-day loop through some of the most remote and beautiful wilderness on the East Coast. The first day was perfect, almost deceptively so. We climbed through forests ablaze with autumn color, laughing and trading stories, feeling the stress of our city lives melt away with every step. We were a tight-knit group, and being out in the wild together felt like coming home. That night, we made camp by a roaring river, cooked a massive dinner over the fire, and stayed up late pointing out constellations in the clear, star-dusted sky. There was no sign of the nightmare that was waiting for us. The trouble started on the second day. The trail became significantly more difficult, a steep, rocky ascent that tested our endurance. The mood shifted. The easy laughter was replaced by focused breathing and the steady crunch of our boots. Around noon, we stopped for a break on a small, windswept clearing. As we were drinking water, Liam, who was always the most observant of us, pointed to a gnarled, old pine tree at the edge of the clearing. "Hey, check this out," he said. Carved into the trunk was a symbol. It was a triangle with a clean, vertical line running through its center. It wasn't a Park Service marker, and it didn't look like random graffiti. It was too precise, too deliberate. "Weird," Sarah commented. "What do you think it means?" "Probably just some local kids club or something," Tom said, always a pragmatist, dismissing it. But I saw Liam take a picture of it with his phone. Something about it had snagged his attention, and by extension, mine. It felt out of place, like a piece of a story we didn't have the context for. We didn't dwell on it, though. We had miles to cover before dusk. A few hours later, the weather took a turn. A thick, wet fog rolled in, descending upon the mountains with startling speed. Visibility dropped to less than 20 feet. The vibrant forest turned into a world of gray, ghostly shapes. The trail, which was already faint, became nearly impossible to follow. We slowed to a crawl, calling out to each other constantly to stay together. It was during this disorienting period that the first real disaster struck. Sarah, who was walking right behind Tom, slipped on a slick, moss-covered rock. We heard a sickening crack, followed by a sharp cry of pain. Her ankle was broken, not sprained. It was bent at a horrifyingly unnatural angle. Panic set in immediately. We were miles from the nearest road. The fog was getting thicker and night was falling. She couldn't walk, and carrying her over this treacherous terrain was a non-starter. We were in serious trouble. Tom, trying to stay calm for Sarah's sake, pulled out the map. He pointed to a small square icon not far from our location. "There's an old hunter's blind marked here," he said, his voice strained. "It's off trail, but it's our best bet for shelter. We can get Sarah out of the elements, and in the morning, Liam and I can hike out for help." It was the only logical plan. Liam and I fashioned a makeshift splint for Sarah's ankle, and then Tom and I half-carried, half-dragged her through the dense, fog-shrouded woods. It was a grueling 30 minutes. Every step was a struggle. Finally, through the gloom, we saw it. A small, elevated wooden structure, basically a rotting box on stilts, accessible by a rickety ladder. It was barely big enough for the four of us, but it was dry. We managed to get Sarah up the ladder and inside. The place was tiny and smelled of decay and dampness. There was nothing inside but a few empty shotgun shells on the floor and a small, shuttered window. While Tom tended to Sarah, I tried to get a signal on my phone to call for help, but it was useless. Liam, meanwhile, was restlessly examining the small space. "Guys," he said, his voice hushed and strange. He was pointing to the wall next to the door. Scratched into the rotting wood, clearly done with the tip of a knife, was the exact same symbol we had seen on the tree earlier. The triangle with the vertical line. A collective chill went through us. The first time, it was a curiosity. The second time here, in this isolated, creepy shelter, it felt like a warning. "Okay, this is officially freaking me out," Sarah said, her voice trembling with more than just pain. "It's a coincidence," Tom insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. He was trying to be the strong one, but I could see the fear in his eyes. The fog was so thick it was like a physical wall, and as darkness became total, the world outside our little box vanished completely. We decided Liam and I would leave at first light. For now, all we could do was wait. We huddled together for warmth, the silence broken only by Sarah's pained whimpers and the sound of our own anxious breathing. Around what must have been 2 a.m., we heard it, a sound from outside. It was a low whistle, a simple two-note melody, like someone calling a dog. It was clear, sharp, and impossibly close. We all froze, our eyes wide in the darkness. Who would be out here in this fog, in the middle of the night? The whistle came again, this time from the other side of the blind. They were circling us. Tom put a finger to his lips, signaling for absolute silence. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. This wasn't a lost hiker. This was deliberate. Then came the scraping. A low, rhythmic scrape against the wooden stilts that held our shelter off the ground. It sounded like someone was dragging a heavy branch or a tool around the base of the blind. The sound was methodical, patient, and utterly terrifying. They knew we were up here. They were toying with us. Liam crept to the shuttered window and peered through a small crack. He stayed there for a full minute before pulling back, his face ashen. "There are 2 of them," he mouthed silently, his eyes filled with terror. "They're just walking in circles, waiting." The scraping stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. We were suspended in a state of pure dread, trapped in a rotting box, surrounded by unknown people with unknown intentions. An hour passed, then another. We stayed completely still, listening. Suddenly, a heavy thud hit the side of the blind, shaking the entire structure. Sarah gasped. Another thud hit the other side. They were throwing rocks at us, or something heavy. It was a show of force, a reminder that they were there, that they were in control. That's when Tom finally broke. "We have to do something," he whispered frantically. We can't just sit here and wait for them to set this thing on fire. What can we do? I shot back. There are two of them and we're trapped. The argument was cut short by a new sound, one that drained every last drop of blood from my face. It was the creak of wood under a heavy weight. From the ladder, one of them was climbing. We stared at the flimsy wooden door, which had no lock. Tom grabbed the only thing we had that could be a weapon, a heavy metal thermos. He stood by the door, his body tense, ready to swing. The creaking stopped just outside. We held our breath, waiting for the door to be thrown open, but it never was. Instead, after a moment of unbearable silence, we heard the creak of the ladder again, this time descending. A few moments later, we heard the two-note whistle again, but this time it was further away. And then silence, a true, deep silence. We didn't sleep. We stayed huddled together, waiting for the sun, convinced they were still out there, just beyond the fog. When the first gray light of dawn finally filtered through cracks, Liam and I peered outside. The fog was beginning to lift. The woods were empty. There was no sign of anyone. Liam and I left as planned, practically running the miles back to the trailhead. We got help, and a search and rescue team brought Tom and Sarah out on an ATV later that day. The official report said Sarah broke her ankle, and we spent a frightening night in the woods. We told the rangers about the whistling, about the things being thrown at the blind. They were sympathetic, but chalked it up to local pranksters, or maybe even a bear. They didn't know what to make of the symbol. But the real, unsettling reveal came a week later. Liam was looking at the photos on his phone from the trip. He zoomed in on the first picture he'd taken, the one of the symbol carved into the pine tree. Then he showed it to me. "Look closer," he said. In the background of that photo, half hidden behind a thicket of trees, was a figure. It was blurry, indistinct, but it was undeniably a person, standing perfectly still, watching us. They had been stalking us since midday, long before the fog rolled in, long before Sarah fell. Her fall wasn't just bad luck. We were herded. The fog, the difficult trail, her accident. It all drove us right to that hunter's blind. The blind with the symbol scratched on the wall. It wasn't a shelter, it was a trap. And for some reason that night, the hunters who said decided to let their prey go. We never found out why. My whole life, my dad has owned a small plot of land bordering the Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee. It's not much, just 5 acres with a tiny one-room cabin he built himself in the 80s. He calls it his getaway spot. For me, it was always a place of absolute peace. The kind of quiet you can't find in the city. The kind that sinks into your bones. I have nothing but happy memories there. Which is why what happened last summer feels like such a violation. Like a beautiful memory being corrupted and overwritten. I'm a musician, and I was deep in a creative slump. I decided to head up to the cabin for a week by myself. No phone, no internet, just me, my guitar, and the woods. I figured the solitude would clear my head. My dad gave me the keys, told me to watch out for black bears, and wish me luck. The first few days were bliss. I spent my time writing music on the porch, hiking the familiar trails, and just soaking in profound silence. The cabin is simple. A main room with a wood stove, a small kitchenette, a bed in the corner, and a big picture window that looks out into the deep woods. There are no other properties for miles. You are truly alone out there. On the 4th night, I was sitting by that window, idly strumming my guitar. The sun had set, and the forest was a wall of blackness beyond the small circle of light from my lamp. I was lost in a melody when a flicker of movement at the edge of the woods caught my eye. I stopped playing. It was a pale shape moving between the trees. I assumed it was a deer, as they often came to the salt lick my dad kept in the yard. I watched, waiting for it to step into the clearing, but it didn't. It stayed just within the tree line, moving back and forth with strange, jerky rhythm. It wasn't the graceful, cautious movement of a deer. It was agitated. I squinted, trying to make out its form. It was tall, taller than a person, and incredibly slender. The pale shape I'd seen was its skin, which seemed to almost glow in the faint starlight. A deep, instinctive fear, cold and sharp, pierced through my calm. This wasn't a deer. I slowly stood up and backed away from the window, my heart starting to thud against my ribs. I turned off the lamp, plunging the cabin into darkness, hoping that whatever it was would lose interest. I crept back to the window and peered out. It was closer now. It had moved to the edge of the yard, and I could see it more clearly. Its body was humanoid in shape, but grotesquely elongated. Its arms were too long, hanging almost to its knees, and its legs were like stilts. It moved with a disturbing, lurching gait, as if it was constantly struggling to keep its balance on its own strange limbs. It took a few steps in the yard, then stopped, its head swiveling back and forth with an unnatural, bird-like quickness. I couldn't see a face, just a smooth, pale oval where a face should be. I stumbled back from the window, my breath catching my throat. My mind was scrambling, trying to fit what I was seeing into a logical box. A person on stilts? A prank? But no prank could account for the way it moved, the silent, unnatural fluidity that was somehow both graceful and utterly wrong. Then, I heard a sound that turned my blood to ice water. It was a voice, but not a human voice. It was a high-pitched, warbling mimicry. It was my own guitar melody, the one I had been playing just minutes before. It was whistling my tune back at me, perfectly. But the sound was hollow, airy, like the wind blowing over the top of a bottle. It knew I was here. It had been listening. It was communicating. Absolute terror, the likes of which I have never known, took hold. I scrambled for the cabin's only door and slammed the heavy deadbolt home. I shoved the heavy wooden dining table against the door, my hands shaking so violently I could barely get a grip. My guitar lay forgotten on the floor. The only thought in my head was trap. I was in a flimsy wooden box, and this thing was outside. I backed away from the door, my eyes locked on it, and listened. The whistling stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, expectant. I could hear my own ragged breathing, the frantic beat of my own heart. Minutes passed. Nothing. Had it gone? Was it a figment of my imagination? No. A soft, exploratory scratch. Scratch! Scratch began at the base of the door. It was the sound of a long fingernail or claw testing the wood. Then came a new sound. A low, wet, sniffing noise right at the crack under the door. It was smelling for me. I backed away until my back hit the far wall, as far from the door as I could get. The sniffing stopped. Then a tremendous boom shook the entire cabin. It had thrown itself against the door. The wood groaned, and the table I'd used as a barricade skidded a few inches across the floor. My heart leaped into my throat. Boom! Another impact. Stronger this time. The door frame splintered. It was trying to break its way in. I was weaponless. My mind raced, searching for an escape. The picture window. It was large, but it was my only other way out. I looked at the door, then at the window. The cabin was small. To get to the window, I would have to cross right in front of the door. It was trying to break down. Boom! A crack appeared in the thick wood of the door. It wasn't going to hold. I made my choice. I took a deep breath and ran. As I sprinted past the door, another impact sent a shower of splinters into the room. I didn't stop. I grabbed a small wooden stool, the only hard object I could lift, and hurled it at the picture window. The glass didn't shatter. It was thick, old pane glass. A spiderweb of cracks appeared, but it held. Panic surged through me. I grabbed the stool again and hit it harder, again and again, putting all my fear and desperation into each blow. On the fourth hit, the glass finally gave way with a deafening crash. I didn't hesitate. I scrambled to the broken frame, cutting my hands and arms on a jagged shard of glass, but I barely felt it. I landed on the soft ground outside and ran. I ran into the pitch-black woods, away from the cabin, away from the rhythmic booming that was still echoing behind me. I ran blindly, crashing through underbrush, my lungs burning, tears of terror streaming down my face. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. Behind me, I heard a final, deafening crack as the cabin door gave way, followed by a high-pitched, warbling shriek of fury. It was a sound of pure inhuman rage. It spurred me on, giving me a new surge of adrenaline. I ran until my legs gave out, and I collapsed at the base of a tree, sobbing and gasping for air. I stayed there, curled into a ball for the rest of the night, flinching at every snap of a twig, convinced it was coming for me. When the sun finally rose, I got my bearings and began the long, agonizing walk back to civilization. It took me most of the day. I was found by a hunter on an ATV who took one look at my cut-up, exhausted state and drove me straight to the nearest town. The police were called, and I told them a wild animal, a bear, had tried to break into the cabin. I couldn't bring myself to describe what I had actually seen. How could I? The unsettling reveal came a week later, when my dad went up to the cabin to survey the damage. He called me, his voice trembling. The door was completely destroyed, torn from its hinges. The window was shattered. But that wasn't what scared him. On the floor, in the middle of the room, was my guitar. It was untouched, except for one thing. 5 deep, parallel gouges were scraped in the wood of its body, running from the bridge to the neck. The marks were thin and impossibly deep, as if made by sharpened steel tips. But the most disturbing part was the spacing. They were too far apart to have been made by a bear's paw. They were spaced like a human hand. If that hand was twice the size of a normal man's and tipped with claws, it had gotten in. It had stood in the room where I had been, and it had left its mark, a silent, terrifying message on the one thing that had drawn its attention in the first place. My grandfather passed away 2 years ago and left me his property in the North Carolina mountains, not far from the Tennessee border. It wasn't much. A few acres of rugged vertical land in a small A-frame cabin that was slowly being reclaimed by the forest. He'd always been a bit of a recluse, and after he died, no one in the family really knew what to do with the place. For me, it was a chance to connect with his memory. I decided to spend a month up there, fixing the place up, clearing some of the overgrown trails, and just trying to understand the quiet life he'd chosen. This happened during my second week there. I'd fallen into a comfortable routine. Wake up with the sun, work on the property until the afternoon heat set in, then spend the evenings reading on the porch. The cabin sat at the top of a long, winding gravel driveway, completely hidden from the nearest county road. The solitude was absolute. The only sound were the wind, the birds, and the rustle of unseen things in the woods. One evening, I was inside making dinner. The sun had just dipped below the ridgeline, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I had the kitchen window open to let in the cool mountain air. That's when I heard it. The distinct sound of a car engine grinding its way up my driveway. It was so unexpected that I froze. I hadn't had a single visitor since I'd arrived. My family knew I wanted to be alone. I went to the front door and looked through the peephole. A beat-up, dark-colored sedan I didn't recognize was crawling up the drive, its engine sputtering and complaining. It came to a stop about 30 yards from the cabin, and the engine cut out. For a full minute, nothing happened. The car just sat there, a silent, dark shape in the twilight. My unease started to grow. This wasn't a delivery driver, and it wasn't a lost tourist. They would have turned around or gotten out to ask for directions. This felt different. Finally, the driver's side door creaked open, and a man got out. He was just a silhouette against a fading light, but I could tell he was tall and wiry. He didn't look toward the cabin. Instead, he just stood by his car, staring off into the woods. I opened the door a crack. "Can I help you?" I called out, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The man's head snapped toward me. The movement was so fast and sharp it was startling. He didn't answer. He just started walking toward the cabin. He had a strange, deliberate gait, planting each foot firmly before taking the next step, like someone learning to walk. As he got closer, I could make out more details. He was wearing dark, dirty clothes. His face was thin and gaunt, with sunken cheeks and eyes that seemed too large for his face. "My car broke down," he said. His voice was a monotone, completely flat and devoid of any emotion. It didn't match the desperate situation of being stranded on a remote mountain at dusk. "My phone's dead," he continued, still walking slowly toward me. "Need to use yours." Every alarm bell in my head was screaming. The way he moved, the deadness in his eyes, the flat tone of his voice, it was all wrong. I knew with absolute certainty that I could not let him get any closer. "Sorry, I don't have a landline and there's no cell service up here. I lied, my hand tightening on the doorknob. The nearest town is about 10 miles back down the mountain. You can't miss it. He didn't stop walking. He was about 15 feet from the porch now. Not asking, he said, his voice still flat, but with a new, chilling edge. I'm going to use your phone. That's when I saw the glint of metal in his hand. It was a tire iron. He wasn't holding it like a tool. He was holding it like a club. I didn't wait to see what he would do next. I slammed the door shut and threw the deadbolt. My heart was hammering. I ran to the back of the cabin, grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, my grandfather's old double-bit axe, and stood with my back to the wall, listening. I heard his heavy footsteps on the wooden porch. Then silence. I held my breath, straining to hear. A soft, scraping sound started at the front window, the sound of metal on glass. He was testing it. The scraping stopped. I heard his footsteps again, circling the cabin. He was looking for another way in. He was hunting for a weakness. The cabin had 4 windows. The one in the front, one in the kitchen, one in the bathroom, and one in the small loft bedroom upstairs. I heard him at the kitchen window, then the bathroom. Each time, a soft, testing scrape. My grandfather had installed storm shutters on all the windows years ago, and I had latched them from the inside when I arrived, more out of habit than fear. Now, I was praying they would hold. Then I heard a new sound. A creaking from outside, near the back of the cabin. It was the old wooden ladder my grandfather had leaned against the house to access the roof. He was climbing. My blood went cold. He was going for the loft window. I knew for a fact its shutter was the oldest and most rotten. I scrambled up the small staircase to the loft. It was a tiny space, just big enough for a bed and a small table. I stood in the middle of the room, axe held ready, and stared at the shuttered window. I could hear him on the roof now, his heavy footsteps thudding right above my head. The footsteps stopped. A moment later, a loud crack came from the window. He had hit the shutter with the tire iron. Crack, wood splintered. A sliver of dark sky appeared. He was breaking it apart, piece by piece. I knew I couldn't just wait for him to get in. This was my only chance. I braced myself. As another piece of the shutter gave way, creating a jagged hole, I saw his arm reach through, fumbling for the window latch. I acted on pure instinct. I swung the axe. I put all my strength, all my terror, into that one swing. The heavy steel connected with his arm with a sickening, wet crunch. I felt the bone break. It was a solid, unmistakable impact. Any normal person would have screamed in agony, whatever coiled. But he didn't. There was no scream, no curse, not even a grunt of pain. There was just a moment of silence. Then the arm, which had been a mangled, useless mess, slowly, deliberately pulled back out of the hole. I stared, my mind unable to process what had just happened. I had just shattered a man's arm with an axe, and he had reacted with the same emotional intensity, as if he'd gotten a splinter. I heard his footsteps on the roof again, calm and steady, as he walked back to the ladder and climbed down. I stayed in that loft for what felt like an eternity, shaking, trying to understand. The lack of a scream was more terrifying than any threat he could have made. It was fundamentally, existentially wrong. It was inhuman. Finally, I crept downstairs. I peered through the peephole. The car was gone. I waited until the sun came up, my grandfather's axe never leaving my hands. The next morning, I drove into town and reported a prowler, a man who had tried to break in. I told the sheriff everything, except for the part about the axe. How could I explain that? It would sound like a confession to a murder or a maiming. The sheriff listened patiently. When I described the man and his dead-eyed stare, a look of weary recognition crossed his face. "We get calls like this sometimes," he said, his voice low. "Hikers, mostly. They see someone in the woods, someone who doesn't look right, doesn't act right. They say they talk to them, and it's like talking to a machine. No one's ever gotten as close as you did, though." The true, horrifying reveal came that afternoon. A deputy drove up to the cabin with me. As we stepped onto the porch, he pointed at the ground. There on the wooden planks was a dark, greasy puddle. It wasn't blood. Blood is red and it clots. This was a thick, black, oil-like substance. And leading from the puddle, down the porch steps, and toward the driveway where the car had been, was a trail of thick, black droplets. "What the hell is that?" the deputy muttered, nudging the puddle with the toe of his boot. I didn't answer. I just stared at the black trail. It was a fluid that had leaked from his arm when I hit him. He wasn't bleeding blood. He was leaking oil. I never went back to the cabin. The family sold the land. I don't know what that thing was. A machine? An automaton? Something else entirely? All I know is that it wears a human face. It carries a tire iron, and when you break its bones, it doesn't bleed. It leaks. My wife, Anna, and I bought our cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Georgia about 5 years ago. It wasn't one of those fancy, modern A-frames. It was an old, off-grid hunter's cabin that had been in the same family for a century. It was our dream project. We spent the first 2 years restoring it, learning how to manage the solar panels, the well pump, and the wood stove. It was hard work, but we loved it. We loved the isolation, the self-sufficiency, and the profound, humbling silence of the mountains. This happened last year, on a hot, humid night in the middle of July. We had a late dinner on our screened-in porch, watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance at the edge of the woods. It was a perfect, peaceful evening. Around 10 p.m., I told Anna I was going to use the bathroom. The one part of the renovation we hadn't finished was the indoor plumbing. The bathroom was still in a small, separate outbuilding about 50 feet from the main cabin, a relic from the original setup. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out into the thick, dark air. As I was walking toward the outhouse, a flicker of movement to my right caught my eye. I swung the flashlight beam in that direction, but the woods were still. I shrugged it off as a raccoon or a fox and continued on. I was inside the small bathroom for less than a minute when I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate boot steps, crunching on the gravel path outside. And they were coming directly toward me. My first thought was Anna. Maybe come and tell me something. But the footsteps were too heavy, too slow. Instinctively, my hand went to the doorknob. The door had no lock, just a simple hook and eye latch on the inside, which I hadn't even bothered to fasten. I called out, "Anna?" The only response was silence. The footsteps had stopped right outside the door. My heart began to pound. Every muscle in my body went rigid. I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that it was not my wife on the other side of that door. I gripped the cold metal knob, my knuckles white, and then I felt it, a slight pressure from the other side. A slow, exploratory tension as someone else's hand took hold of the knob. We were separated by just an inch of wood, both holding the same handle in a silent, terrifying stalemate. My mind raced. Who was out here? Why were they being so quiet? After a long, agonizing moment, the pressure on the knob vanished. I heard the footsteps again, moving away, not back down the path, but circling around the outbuilding. All I could think about was Anna. She was alone in the cabin, with the back door probably unlocked. I frantically fumbled for my phone, but I'd left it inside. I had to get back to her. I waited until the footsteps sounded like they were at the back of the small structure. Then I threw the door open and sprinted. The 50 feet back to the cabin felt like a mile. I burst through the back door, shouting her name. She was standing by the living room window, her own phone pressed to her ear. She saw the terror on my face, ran to the door, slammed it shut behind me, and threw the deadbolt. "They're on their way," she whispered, her voice shaking. I saw someone walk past the window. "Get the gun," I told her, my voice barely a whisper. While she retrieved the shotgun we kept for protection, I went around the cabin, making sure every window was locked and every blind was drawn. When I came back to the living room, Anna was standing frozen, her hand over her mouth, muffling a scream. She pointed a trembling finger at the large window that faced the front yard. I turned to look, and my blood ran cold. Pressed against the glass, illuminated by the faint glow of our security light, was a man's face. He had both hands flat against the window, peering in. A wide, manic grin stretched across his features, a horrifying expression of pure, predatory delight. His eyes were wide and unblinking. On his lower lip, I could see a small, dark cut. I raised a shotgun, the sound of me cocking it echoing loudly in the silent room. I aimed it squarely at his chest. His grin didn't falter. His eyes flickered from the barrel of the gun to my face. And then he did something that I will never forget. He winked, a slow, deliberate wink. Then, with an unnerving calmness, he pushed himself away from the window and strolled casually back into the darkness. We didn't move. We just stood there, shaking, waiting for the police. It took the sheriff's deputies 45 minutes to navigate the remote roads to our cabin. By the time they arrived, the man was long gone. We gave them his description. The grin, the dark hair, the cut on his lip. Over the next 2 days, they searched the surrounding woods. The first discovery confirmed our fears. About 100 yards from our cabin, hidden in a dense laurel thicket, they found a small, crude campsite, a dirty tent, a sleeping bag, and a pair of high-power binoculars aimed directly at our home. He had been watching us. We had thought we were alone for months, but we had been under constant surveillance. The deputies packed up the site as evidence and continued their search. The true, final, and most unsettling reveal came on the third day. The lead deputy, an old-timer named Henderson with weary eyes that had seen too much, asked us to come down to the station. He sat us down in his small office. "We didn't find your guy," he said, his voice grim, "but we found where he'd been spending more of his time. A small cave, about a mile up the ridge from your place." He pushed a folder across his desk. Inside were crime scene photos. The cave was filled with disturbing debris, empty food cans, discarded clothing, and ropes. But what made me feel physically ill were the walls. They were covered in scratches and crude drawings. And among the bizarre symbols and violent sketches, one symbol was repeated over and over again. It was a triangle with a single vertical line running from its top point to the middle of its base. I stared at the photo, my mind reeling. It was a clean, geometric shape amidst the chaos, a mark of cold intention. "We've been finding these carved all over this ridge for the last year," Henderson said, his voice barely above a whisper as he tapped the photo of the symbol. He looked from me to Anna, his eyes filled with a deep, chilling exhaustion. No one knows who's doing it or what it means. He leaned forward, and his next words sealed the horror of our experience into something far larger and far more terrifying. "All we know," he said, "is that where this sign appears, people go missing." We sold the cabin. We moved back to the city, trading the profound silence of the mountains for the anonymous noise of traffic and sirens. But there is no real safety. I can't look at a dark window without seeing that grinning face pressed against the glass. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I see that symbol. It isn't just a random mark. It's a brand. It's the calling card of a ghost who haunts those mountains, a hunter who watches from the trees. And we were just the ones who happened to see him. The ones he winked at before disappearing back into the darkness, leaving us to wonder how many others he didn't let go.